All right. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Apologize about my sound system. I've been trying to fix my mic and I haven't found the issue yet. I'll put it that way. I haven't found the issue yet. It's a little ringing noise that has been going on for a while, but it's not, I don't know. I might have to just, completely take it apart and re-put it together. But anyway, my apologies. Hope all is well. Shout out to all of y'all. Welcome back. Black Masculinist news for the day. Shout out to Very Little. Appreciate that. Kicking off the donation drive. That's what's up. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel if you will. You can do so in a variety of ways. You can see them right there on the screen. You can hit me up on the Venmo, the PayPal, the Cash App. You can become a patron of the channel as well as the Institute for Black Male Studies and Onyx TV Network. You can support all of them by becoming a patron, or you can become a member right here on YouTube and join the membership, join the fraternity, if you will. I mean that very informally. The Onyx Report, right? The Brotherhood of the Onyx Report. So you can do that and support. But yeah, shout out some of the brothers in here. What's up, brother? Truth, Master REB, Eugene, what's good? We got Ron and Aaron in the house. Heru, what's up? Right? Donnie, what's good? Ghetto User, what's happening? Hey, Leroy, Layman's Journal, good to see you, man. Hey, yeah, Layman, I just watched, what was that? It was Tom Hanks. What is it? Forrest Gump. Man, please get Jenny, man. It's funny, man, when you watch these movies you grew up watching, you saw them one way, and then, mess around and get red pilled and watch them again and be like, what is this shit? Which has happened to a majority of the movies I grew up on. Ghetto User, appreciate that. No doubt. Anyway, let's get it started. And I want y'all, even though he's not necessarily referring to the subject we're going to cover, I want you guys to at least check out what Kwame has to say, because I think it speaks to the theme of today's show. Here we go.
Sit down and they talk about traumas that's happened to them. Don't we all pay attention and listen and understand? Why is it when a black male says that I grew up in a household with no father, I grew up with no leadership, I've been shot at, the police profiled me, I get no respect from males or females, why wouldn't I be angry? And that's the problem. We keep trying to tell black men that you can just man up, you have no reason to be angry. We do.
All right. So he's talking about a variety of issues. Today, we're going to talk about grape. We're going to talk about sexual assault, but we're going to look at it from the vantage point of not just black men, but black boys. We're going to look at the age range where these issues tend to hit us. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that actually means. And the way we're going to start that up is through this article right here. Now, I'm not even going to have Snoop read this one because, I have to account for some of the verbiage, the YouTube games that are played. You have to kind of dance around certain words. Nevertheless, this is from Newsweek. This is dated February 4th of 2022. I thought it had some important information for us to look at. Ohio Supreme Court narrows standard for rape and rape. See, I made the mistake myself. In case involving 2-year-old. Now, I don't think this is a black boy in this case. So, I'm talking about boys and black boys in particular. But we'll get to that, right? So it reads, an Ohio woman's conviction of graping her own son has been overturned following the state Supreme Court's decision to narrow the definition of grape. The decision has enraged victims' advocates who say the court did not care about the long-term impact the abuse may have on the child. The case has sparked outrage, leading people to question what this ruling means for future child sex abuse victims. Miranda Smith, 30 years old, was charged with graping her 2-year-old son in 2019, even though she did not penetrate him sexually, but had her son penetrate her. Right? Rape and sexual assault cases have been infamously difficult for suspect arraignment, as prosecutors have high burden of proof to convince a judge or jury a crime happened beyond a reasonable doubt. Smith pleaded no contest to multiple sexual offenses, but argued that she did not technically grape her son. She did not deny that she instructed the 2-year-old to vaginally penetrate her with a sex toy, and that she filmed the act and sent it to her boyfriend. She was initially sentenced to 10 years to life. Smith's attorney, Max Hirsch of the Ohio Public Defender's Office, argued that Smith was guilty of gross sexual imposition under the state law, but not rape. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the definition of rape is the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. Now, I'm going to read that part again. Because I think it's incredibly important. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the definition of rape is the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by sex organ of another person without consent of the victim. This is, oh, hold on. Sorry about that. These definitions have basically weaponized the very concept of sexual assault against males across age for generations. But let's continue. Justice Patrick F. Fisher wrote, Smith argues that there was insufficient evidence to support her conviction because there is legally significant distinction between engaging in sexual conduct with another and causing another to engage in sexual conduct. Given the plain and unambiguous statutory text, we agree. Since Smith did not penetrate the boy, her conviction was overturned. Ohio Supreme Court's unanimous February 2nd decision determined that although Smith's actions were grounds for a charge of gross sexual imposition, they technically do not constitute rape as defined by state law. According to Dan Trevis of Court News, Ohio, a conviction for rape requires, I'm horrible at it. I'm just an old classroom teacher. We say this when we read it in class, but for some reason, it's too much to read over YouTube. This is bullshit. Shout out to Dark Power for the Cash App. Much appreciation to Hurricane Greg for the donation. Thank you. right? Anyway, a conviction of rape requires evidence that the accused inserted a body part or object into another person. So they haven't fathomed that the aggressor could be the one to have put, one's body part inside themselves, right? In other words, they haven't factored that women can be aggressors. That's really what it comes down to. That somebody born female, right? Somebody female at birth can be the aggressor. This is really what they're saying. And they do account for lesbian relationships to the extent that one woman, penetrates another with a body part or a physical item, but they don't account for how women can actually engage this process by having someone else, put inside her. This is what we're really getting at, right? The court agreed with Smith's argument about the legal distinction and ruled that the court could modify its judgment to reflect that Smith is guilty of gross sexual imposition without scheduling another trial. The lesser offense of gross sexual imposition could reduce Smith's sentencing. Amy Dudley, the director of YWCA's Dayton Center for Survivors of Sexual Violence, said that the fact that child sex crime survivors' trauma affects far into their adulthood and may cause more issues than the initial abuse. If we can say that a 2-year-old was complicit in Smith's sexual conduct, what does that say for older survivors, right? And this has already been happening. There are grown men, there are elderly men, and I've met them and have conversations with them over the years that have suffered from some type of sexual assault in childhood, right? And there was no frame of reference for their experience. You know what ended up happening? Their experience was ignored altogether. And this has happened to countless boys. And don't get me started on black boys. It's worse for black boys. Because black males are already perceived to be society's boogeymen. We're not considered human in a certain respect. We're considered a threat to everyone else. It's kind of like a pit bull or a great white shark, right? How much empathy do people have for these types of animals that are perceived to be these violent monsters, right? They're not perceived to be, they don't have any frame of reference beyond the violence that people fear, right? But that's how black men are viewed, even black boys. And we see that the data shows us, even as young as 4 and 5 years old, these boys are perceived to be older than they are and have garnered other people's fear simply because they exist. You talk about classroom teachers dealing with little kids. Black boys will be singled out and treated differently, even when they do the same thing other kids are doing. This is a reflection of society's fear of black males. And so it extends into issues like this. Now, I think some of this applies to boys across the board. I think black boys just have a much deeper kind of impact with this. But the empathy around males being perceived as victims and females being perceived as aggressors is still something that clearly some states have difficulty with processing, right? More people took to Twitter after Smith's conviction was overturned, upset with the justice's decision. User @RoverMac argued that the child was still subjugated to sexual assault. But they dance around these words because they know grape is where you have the biggest impact. You call it anything other than that, and it's downplayed, even in the imagination of others, right? People play with these words. I just caught a little bit of the interview with Andrew Tate and Tucker Carlson. And Tate talked about how, when it came to how, I think it was Romania, how they framed his charges, the first thing that most people around the world are going to think of is that he had sexually assaulted someone, when he actually pointed out the accusation made by the Romanian government was that he forced women to do was it TikTok videos that don't even garner a profit, and then he took it. Like, he supposedly took profits even though it doesn't pay, but he said it actually had nothing to do with sex. But based on the name of the charges, right, there's no way you wouldn't associate sex with the charges. This is the same thing that's happening with this question of how grape as a term is used when it comes to accusations, when it comes to legal charges. This is why we have the black male political agenda, because these kinds of terms, the way they're introduced in the verbiage of the policies that we're fighting over, changes how those policies are applied and to who and to what extent. A simple word choice can change the game on how a lot of these sentences are dropped or tacked on. And we have to understand this is how subtle this stuff is. This is how they play these games, right? So the question remains, why would anyone in CPS consider the lesser charge justified for the victim? He wrote, a 2-year-old is still a victim of sexual assault. Disgusting ruling, Ohio judge. Again, no accountability in biased courts. Again, sexual assault. It has a lesser impact on society. Another user argued that forcing someone to commit a sexual act on another person should be considered rape, especially when children are involved. Absolutely. Disgusting because the 2-year-old was coerced into doing whatever the act was to the woman. It could not have been considered rape of a child, but gross sexual imposition. Are you kidding me? She filmed it and sent it via her phone to her boyfriend. Was this her own child? Right? Newsweek has reached out to National Sexual Violence Resource Center for comment, right? So that's that. That's that. Right? This is what we're looking at. This is why I asked the question in the very title of the video: can boys ever have their innocence stolen by female sexual aggressors? Because in this court of law in Ohio, no. Only to the extent of a lesser charge, or a charge or term that's used that has lesser impact on society. That's the closest you can. So it really, what it does is it denies boys the ability to have their innocence taken, their ability to be what exactly they've experienced. Right? What 2-year-old is going to have the wherewithal to challenge what his mother is telling him to do when she's sick? And when she's actually charged for it, nothing of substance, nothing of consequence in regard to what she's sentenced with. So this is what males deal with, even as toddlers. Even as toddlers, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. As a matter of fact, in order for us to actually be able to be absolved of these types of charges, let me show you how far things have to go. Get some of this junk off the screen. All right. Yeah, these articles, they like to tack this stuff on. Let's stop that one. Share another one. You guys tell me if you're familiar with this. Right? Emotional Benjamin Mendy says, praise be to God, as ex-Manchester City star is cleared of raping a woman at his £4 million mansion and trying to grape another. Right? Says the emotional Benjamin Mendy today wept and said, praise be to God, after he was cleared of grape and attempted grape. The ex-Manchester City footballer, 28 years old, was accused of carrying out sex attacks on 2 women at his £4 million mansion. He was cleared after 3 hours of deliberation by a jury at Chester Crown Court this afternoon, and broke down in the dock afterwards before saying he was delighted with the not guilty verdicts. Mendy had faced. Oh man, okay. Sometimes you don't know if these video clips are going to hit you with a copyright. So, but that's him there, Benjamin Mendy, leaving court as he's cleared of grape. Right. Mendy had faced retrial on 1 count of rape and 1 count of attempted rape during lockdown busting parties. He is now a free man, but without a club after his Man City contract expired at the end of June, and having played his last game for the Premier League champions in August 2021, the French international fullback was already cleared of 6 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual assault after a court case in January. Oh, I hate when they do that. Just pop in stuff. Mendy wept when he was cleared. His lawyer said he would now rebuild his life and return to top flight football is now likely. The emotional star declined to comment outside court, only to say Alhamdulillah, an Arabic phrase meaning praise be to God. See him there in tears. Right. Jenny Wiltshire, head of serious and general crime at Hickman and Rose, said Benjamin Mendy would like to thank the members of the jury for focusing on the evidence of this trial. Let's get to that, though. This is the second time Mendy has been tried and found not guilty by a jury. He's delighted that both juries reached the correct verdicts. It's been almost 3 years since the police started investigating this matter. Mr. Mendy has tried to remain strong, but the process has inevitably had a serious impact on him. The French International 28 denied being a sexual predator and carrying out two sex assaults. He was acquitted. Was following a 3-week trial at Chester Crown Court. Trying to get to, let's get to it. Where is it? I need all this introductory shit. He was also found not guilty of rape of a second woman. Mendy first met the first alleged victim at a nightclub in Barcelona in October 2017 when she became intimate with his friend, Diaco Fofana, another French football player. The woman kept in touch with Fofana and arranged to meet up with him at Mendy's mansion a year later. The three went clubbing in Manchester, with the woman staying over with Fofana in a spare bedroom at the property that night. Mendy, who she claimed had a predatory look on his face, walked into her bedroom the next morning, aroused and wearing just his boxers as she took a shower. The woman claimed Mendy then tried to grape her on the bed after she repeatedly told him stop in French before she was able to struggle free. Right. Let's see. She told the jury she was left shocked and confused by her ordeal, and after fleeing the mansion, she messaged a friend saying she had been sexually abused by Mendy. But Mendy claimed the woman had flirted with him prior to the incident, and there was only consensual sexual touching between them. At no point was I forceful or dragged her to the bed. He claimed the woman only became upset when he told her that Fofana had given him permission to have sex with her. Mendy met the second woman while she was out with friends at a bar in Alderley Edge, Cheshire, in October 2020. The group went back to Mendy's home, where he took the woman's phone and accused her of taking photos that could be posted on social media, potentially getting him into further trouble after he was fined for breaking, COVID rules over a previous party at his home. Mendy was said to have looked at intimate photos of the woman, and when she followed him to get her phone back, he led her into his bedroom, which had a security door that locked behind her and was operated using a password. He allegedly told the woman to strip if she wanted her phone back before throwing it on the bed. The woman, who was left wearing only a thong, told the jury that Mendy got behind her as she went to retrieve her phone and raped her. Despite her repeatedly telling him that she didn't want to have sex, it was only stopped when she managed to sit up on the bed, she said, when Mendy accused her of being too shy and boasted, "It's fine, I've had sex with 10,000 women." Mendy claimed the woman was happy to go to his bedroom, where they had consensual oral sex. Although she hadn't wanted further sex, he said, she agreed they could play around and have further sexual contact, and he hadn't forced her before it stopped. Benjamin Aina, KC, prosecuting, told the jury that Mendy's wealth and position in society meant he was used to women saying yes to his sexual advances, and no wasn't an option. Mendy had an appetite for sex, appetite for control, and didn't care for the feelings or views of women unless they matched his own. What Mr. Mendy wants, he gets. They told the jury. Eleanor Laws, defending, told the jury that Mendy wasn't a sexual predator, and moral judgments about his lifestyle, which involved partying and casual sex with lots of different women, should be put to one side. She said the jury had no evidence that he was controlling, violent, and what Mr. Mendy wants, Mr. Mendy gets, and he doesn't care about the consent. She said that women's accounts of what happened contain lies, inconsistencies, very strange things. She claimed Mendy had not tried to rape the first woman, while the second woman had talked herself into believing she had been raped after regretting being pressured to have sex with him. Right? It was a second trial. Mendy has faced accused of sexual assault or sexual attacks. Right? So in other words, right, this is what you have to go through as a black male to be absolved of something like this. And much of the time, that's if you have the means to argue for your own defense. We saw this happening with Jonathan Majors, right, where apparently a New York police officer, right, told his ex-girlfriend what she should say, how it should go, and he actually had to produce video evidence to prove that what she claimed had taken place with her and him was false. And yet he lost a lot of his work, a lot of contracts around just having the accusation. And to my knowledge, even after proving himself, innocent for the most part, I don't think he's gotten back all those contracts. I think he's still in the MCU, but a lot of the other agreements, a lot of the other contracts he had, I don't think he's getting those back, right? So this accusation alone, especially when you talk about black males, is particularly difficult because we're already perceived a certain way, right? The very idea of being sexual predators was linked to black manhood, particularly in the 20th century, right? It was the evolutionary legacy of the stereotypes about black males being sexual predators, right? And it evolved into violent predators and thieves and criminals by the time you get to the mid 20th century. So these things have become synonymous with black malehood. And again, makes it difficult to perceive black males as anything other than being boogeymen, right? This is part of the problem. This is not something that's just limited to these articles. There are plenty more. And the violation of boys tends to go ignored. Let's see. I'll give you an example. I'm just going to play the first part of this. Here we go.
I never said this in no interview, no podcast, or anything like that. I grew up real violent and real aggressive, not because I wanted to be, but I was molested when I was a child. So I had this fear of being vulnerable. So I took every kind of martial arts you could take, and I even boxed. I did everything, and I wanted to be the toughest person on earth. But writing and making music was always an escape for me. Like I never had the nuts to come out and say that. This is my first time saying this today since I've been.
Yeah, but I know that route too. Why do you think I became the meanest motherfucker on the planet? Somebody did something to me,
Yes, sir.
and I didn't want it to happen again. So I became this guy.
Yeah. Take it to the furthest extent.
Dark Winter, appreciate that support. Man, I hope you guys could see that pretty clearly, right? This is what brothers are dealing with. But how much empathy does somebody have for someone like Mike Tyson, right? Who most of the world fears, I think it was Jamie Foxx that said, you see Mike Tyson, the feeling you get is like seeing a pit bull not on a chain, right? Who has empathy for that person, right? Who wants to even reflect on how he came about? What decisions went into him becoming that? What kind of frustration, what kind of pain, what kind of trauma did he experience that made him want to be that, knowing full well that those things don't change and never will what actually took place, what actually happened. But as long as boys, and black boys in particular, and black men to that extent, can't be regarded as human beings who've experienced something traumatic when it's occurred, right? How then does that ever get resolved? Well, there's actually, as far as the Ohio judgment, I'm going to put the link in the chat. There's actually something that I want to share with you. Now, this is a document that I put together years ago. This is back in 2016. The link in the chat, and I'll put it in the description box as well. You can check it out for yourself. What this is just what I call the male grape information sheet. And it lists out some information I think might be of use to some of you, right? I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to go through number 2 because I think this is important. I think this is where Ohio might be behind on certain things. It says from 1930 to 2012, the FBI defined forcible grape for data collecting purposes as the carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will. So in other words, what this meant is up until 2012, the very definition of grape was about female violation, right? The carnal knowledge of a female forcibly against her will, right? Eventually, localities began to rebel against that limited gender-bound definition. In 2010, Chicago reported 86,776 cases of grape, but used its own broader definition, so the FBI left out the Chicago stats. Finally, in 2012, the FBI revised its definition and focused on penetration with no mention of female or force. Although helpful, this definition still ignores made to penetrate situations for males. Made to penetrate, right? Now, there's some other data that I think some of you will find important, but we're going to stick on made to penetrate. Let me see. There we go. So number 7. Centers for Disease Control invented a category of sexual violence called made to penetrate, or being made to penetrate. This definition includes victims, male and female, who were forced to penetrate someone else with their own body parts or foreign item, either by physical force or coercion. See, that would include the 2-year-old child, coercion, right? Or when the victim was drunk or high or otherwise unable to consent. And that's a whole nother area, right? Because children are not legally able to give consent, especially when it comes to sexual acts with an adult. They're not legally, even if the kid is 15, they're not legally considered able to consent. When those cases were taken into account, the rates of non-consensual sexual contact basically equalized, with 1.270 million women and 1.267 million men claiming to be victims of sexual assault, both 1.1% in 2010 and 1.7 and 1.6% respectively in 2011. These were listed in a Time.com article some years ago, right? So in other words, what they found was when they changed the definition of grape to include, or to really, they withheld gender and they included made to penetrate, what they found was that men and women basically experience sexual violation to roughly the same degrees. And I used to hear people say 99% of grapes are men violating women. You could easily make this charge when the very definition of grape only acknowledges women. But once they changed the verbiage to include scores of cases that they couldn't classify because there was no formal definition that included them, they found that sexual violation equalized between men and women, and that women could be as aggressive as men, but just in a different way, right? And you can see this as you look at a variety of different types of things, whether you're talking about sexual assault, you can talk about abuse, you can even talk about child homicide. People tend to victimize those who cannot defend themselves and cannot protect themselves. And contrary to popular belief, males across age can be vulnerable and they can be impacted by others against their will. This is what it is. And you don't have to be weak. You don't have to be handicapped. You don't have to suffer from, various types of developmental mental issues. It doesn't have to do with any of that. Anybody can be vulnerable in any given moment. You got a wife that wants to pour boiled water on you while you're asleep at 3 a.m, you're vulnerable. You got someone that wants to pull a knife on you, that wants to poison your food. There's so many ways to take advantage of your vulnerability. Vulnerability doesn't even have to be when you're asleep or when you're physically injured. It could simply be when you're in a whole different zone. You're just having a conversation, you're having a good day, whatever. And someone completely, attacks you out of context. You're vulnerable in that given moment, right? Shout out to Trash. Appreciate that support. So that being said, as long as vulnerability, can really hit you at any point in time, there's nobody that's completely incapable of being hurt or violated in some kind of way, let alone a 2-year-old boy who's doing what his mother told him to do. Doesn't even have a sense of sexuality yet. None. And he's being exploited, but women can actually be not be held accountable on the basis of this idea, this Victorian idea that Green Gorilla has talked about for years. The Green Gorilla channel here on YouTube, if you're not familiar, go check it out. Support D with the PhD, but he's talked about this for years, right? This Victorian aged idea that women are sugar and spice and everything nice. They are literally the repository for sweetness and grace and love and so on and so forth. And believe it or not, these stereotypes shape how people are actually sentenced. This is why women experience about 63% less time when sentenced for committing the same crimes as men. It's because we as society do not know how to hold women accountable. We don't know how to interpret and deal with female evil, female acts of evil. They tend to get off. And women have learned over generations how to exploit that to their benefit. If you know there are not going to be any significant repercussions for your actions, especially on par with men, why would you care what you do? You would basically learn, you'd be socialized into an adulthood that has very little accountability, especially for extreme behavior. And this is what we're seeing. This is what we're looking at, right? So I just kind of want to put that on the board because this stuff is impacting children, right? It's not just grown men, even though it includes grown men. This impacts boys at every age, men at every age, from newborn to elderly. And don't get it twisted. Black men and men in general, but especially black men, they do experience being assaulted and exploited, even in senior facilities, senior homes. Don't get it twisted. They do, sexually and otherwise. Sometimes it's even just for the money. Where they're I had a conversation with a woman who runs a senior facility a couple of years ago about my stepfather, and she told me straight up. She said, first of all, because especially during the pandemic, you had a lot of people losing their residence, right? Losing their housing, having to find places to go, especially the elderly. She told me straight out, she said, look, I'm gonna talk to you off the books. She said, unless your family is wealthy, your stepfather isn't even gonna make it in here. He's not even gonna get into the facility. We only pretty much take that. And she said that's become kind of standard across the entire industry, right? And if he gets in here, depending on where he is, she said, I can't even, promise you that there'll be any good treatment. It's just something we know we can charge for. So you have elderly folk, especially men, who can be brought in and left to their own devices, really, even if they're not able to care for themselves when they're first brought in, but they're exploited for resources because they know it's a need that can be filled. Yeah. Trouble Man says John Amos, for example. Absolutely. Right? So, just again, wanted to put that on the table. This has to do with the dehumanization of boys. And it has to, and what you add on with that dehumanization for black boys is misandry, anti-black misandry, very particular misandry that's dedicated toward black males. That legacy of stereotyping I told you about is what turns the dehumanization of boys into something much more specific when it comes to black males. Appreciate that expansion on the Cash App. Thank you. But here's the thing that does give me a hope that I never had before. I'm seeing men speaking up in more ways than I've ever seen. Even the tweets that I read in the article on the woman in Ohio was vastly different than anything I remembered 10, 15, 20 years ago when I would research some of this information. I never saw a collective of men come out to public and publicly chastise the mistreatment of boys and men, right? Even the case with Mendy, where you're starting to see the public interpret female behavior differently. This is something it's fairly new. From Jonathan Majors to Johnny Depp, you have people coming forward saying women can no longer be innocent just because they say they are. We actually have to engage in due process. We actually have to look at evidence. I know men who've lost their careers on evidence-less accusations. Hopefully, we're starting to see the tide turn on that. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with men finally accepting that they don't have to just sit and take shit, that they can actually respond. And if nothing else, respond to at least your sons being mistreated, being exploited by sick people who do it because they can. And they know, just like what Amber Heard told Johnny Depp, who's going to believe you? If you tell anybody what happened, who's going to believe you? She knew all she had to do was get on camera and cry. It would be a wrap. We do not handle tears from women well. That's collectively and individually. I can't tell you, man. It's funny. I used to have arguments with girlfriends, and I'd be like, this is some illogical shit, and I'd just be breaking down point by point. And as soon as she start crying, I go, "Oh, no, I'm sorry, baby. It's gonna be okay." I'm apologizing for something she did. For years, I never even processed it, and it never dawned on me that any of that was intentional. Right? I just thought, she's crying. Oh my God, I got to take care of her. And it took years before I realized, women been practicing that since childhood, getting over daddy on that mess. But it never dawned on me that it was actually a political tool. Women's tears, especially white women's tears, is a serious political weapon that can get them out of crimes, can get them out of being held accountable. And they themselves have been conditioned to know that these tiers are a power that they can use. It's based on, really on chivalry, right? It's really a power men give via society, and we continue to give it. And it's been weaponized, and it's just now, I should say, dawning on many men that this is being used very purposely. So it's interesting if you think about the review of the series, The Power, that I did, the last video I did, myself and Layman's Journal, we talked about this show on Amazon called The Power, where women develop this eel-like capacity to shock people with electricity from their bodies, and this is supposed to change the world. You don't need no fucking electricity. All you gotta do is cry. That's what's been going on for generations, centuries. And now you have men that are finally starting to recognize it for the tool it's been used for. What happens when that power is taken back? What happens when that power is nullified by need and focus on evidence? It's not to say that men are innocent and all. I'm not saying that at all. There are plenty of men that have done all kinds of heinous stuff to women and to other men and to a variety of other demographics. But it doesn't mean you can't argue that men are inherently guilty any sooner than you argue that women are inherently innocent. This is the shit we actually have to break down. These kind of Manichaean opposing ideas have to be broken down. And the only thing that we can use as a measure for truth is evidence. Something that black males in particular have not had the luxury to be measured against for generations. Let's see, what is it? Floyd says there's a story of a black male suffering from cancer being forgotten by his nurses while fire ants chewed on him for days at the Atlanta VA hospital. Man, yeah, that is a form of exploitation, and it's sexual to the degree that it's happening to a male. And I mean that in this way. If there's a bifurcation in the treatment of elder males and elder females, right? If that is the case, then that's the sexual component to this that we could actually talk about. Because don't get it twisted. If there's a violation that happens to women that doesn't, happen to men, that's going to get attention, and it should. I just don't understand how exactly that men's experiences need to be ignored altogether, especially to validate women's. No. I'm not making these arguments out of any particular frustration for women. I'm making these arguments because boys and men are suffering and being ignored. And it's happening in accordance with the law. The article I read you about the Ohio Supreme Court, right, reducing this woman's charge from rape to sexual imposition. This is what we're talking about. We're looking at how policy is being used to advance one demographic over another. Now, this isn't a new idea, but there are areas of it that we are newly paying attention to en masse. And this is what I'm pushing for people to do. Women, men, across the board, I'm pushing for people to recognize the way boys and men can be exploited, most particularly black boys and men can be exploited and ignored, and have their situations only come up often when useful to other demographics. This is my problem with BLM. They weaponize black male vulnerability for their advancement. And as soon as they got the mic and you paid attention to them, they bait and switch the story to other demographics. Women, LGBT, they did anything they could. They used black male death, often heterosexual black male death, to get the attention of the public. Then they switched the focus of their comments to other demographics. Black men and boys, heterosexual in particular, just were useful tools for attracting attention. And then, upon getting millions of dollars in donations, left those black male families with nothing. You heard of any policy advance for black males? I haven't. So anyway, these are the kind of things I'm taking. And at the end of it, here's another component that I want to add before we move out on this. There's a newly forming brotherhood in this last decade that I've seen online. And I think the potential for that brotherhood is incalculable. What I hope to see happen is that this collective of men can do a couple things. At least two. First, we reestablish that our boys are fucking human. Look, I'm gonna tell you, man, I never had much belief in innocence until I had a son. I was the first to hold that boy when he came out of his mother. And I watched him learn years later what a lie was. And it's, if you're a parent, it's frustrating and hilarious to watch your child learn what a lie is. But up until that point, you're talking about a being that is incapable of anything but innocence. And boys are robbed of that innocence at a very young age. But the reality is they have it simply because this is what happens with human beings when they're born. They're capable of innocence. We, as a collective of men, need to protect that in our boys. They can be innocent. Grown men can be innocent. People can be innocent. This is a condition of the human experience, but it's one that often men, and Black men at that, are not allowed to have. But in order for us to reclaim that humanity that has been taken away from us, I think one of the starting points to that is protecting our boys' innocence. Meaning you protect the fact that they have it. It shouldn't be a question if a 2-year-old is forced to have sex with his mother. The whole question of whether or not he can be innocent enough to have been raped has been dismissed by this Ohio court. We have to be the ones to make sure our boys can be seen as innocent. And I'm telling you, it changes your perspective when you raise a child and you see that they don't know anything but innocence. Shout out to Dr. Thunder. What's up? Chef Mike, what's going on? Indigo, what's good? Busha, what's up? LaShawn, KG, you know what I'm saying? See the brothers in the house. Appreciate y'all coming. Clutch and Stick, what's going on? Good to see you in here. Let me see if I missed. Yeah, I did. Shout out to Trash for the support, as well as Floyd. I think I mentioned them. Appreciate that. But yeah, I want us to be able to acknowledge and protect our boys' innocence and each other. And here's the thing that I think needs to happen most. Brothers need to actually support each other. We really do. Men need to there needs to be a level of support that men can extend to one another, at least in terms of policy, when it's advantageous for us to do so as a collective of men. There's definitely a need for that. But most particularly in the Black community, the need for Black brothers to support one another. And I'm starting to see more of it in ways that I didn't expect. And I want to publicly call it out and say we need more of it. Because in many instances, the kind of experiences you've had as Black men, the only ones that are going to understand it are other Black men. Brothers reach out to me all the time. They can't explain it to their girlfriends, their wives, their sisters, their mothers, who immediately assume that they're guilty or they're wrong and don't understand what exactly the Black male experience is. It sounds contradictory, but you're talking about people you grow up with who really don't understand what you're experiencing because they don't have to experience it. They assume that you have the same experience they do simply because you live with them or you grew up with them. No. There are experiences Black males have that to this day, Black women do not accept, do not understand, do not regard as existing simply because they don't experience it the same way. The only other ones that are going to understand you more often than not are Black males. And those are the relationships we need to learn to cultivate to support each other. Shout out to Cameron. Says, appreciate the knowledge, good brother. Thank you for that. I'm not going to hold you long. Shout out to Busha. He says, thank you for what you do for the intellect. Appreciate that. This is what we got to do, man. This is as a political a moment as it is spiritual. It is as spiritual a moment as it is social. It is as social a moment as it is any other context you can think of. Economic, so on and so forth. This is an upending era. There's a revolutionary shift, but we've only learned to define revolutionary as this kind of violent political uprising, but it's actually happening on multiple levels. And it's starting with men questioning what they've been socialized into doing and whether or not how they've been socialized is of any use to themselves, or is it just a matter of what's useful to others? And so far, especially Black men are finding that our socialization is not about us. It's about how others benefit from us. We become tools for their advancement. And most men can actually deal with that as long as there's a degree of respect, which has been removed from the equation. Now, here's the thing. once the question of respect has been removed from the equation, you have more and more men saying, why is it even worth me sacrificing for your well-being? And so the tapestry is unraveling, and it's men that are leading the charge. And this is usually, this usually leads to societal collapse. I'll be honest with you. It doesn't, unless you have a massive push on multiple levels in a variety of contexts to advocate for the humanity of males in a society where they've been deemed monstrous. Unless there's a massive investment from children in school to charges about sexual assault to even the capacity to perceive males as having innocence. Until there's a massive investment in that, it's just going to lead to societal collapse. You can't have a society where men have checked out. You can't. There's only a certain percentage where that works until. We can debate about the percentage, but at the end of the day, unless there's a massive investment to reverse this, or at least stop it enough for society to reflect on it, it's not going to go well. And all these other groups that have been told they don't need men for generations are going to find, and they are finding, even in the midst of this current economy, that shit was a lie. It was a lie. Shout out to Leon. He says, I don't want my 2 stories public, so I'll send you the message on FB Messenger. That's what's up. You can do that. I think there was another that I missed. Cameron. I think I might have mentioned him, but thank you, Cameron, nonetheless. So anyway, I'll close it out there. And as usual, I definitely want to read your comments. I want to see what you have to say about this stuff. I want to know what experiences you've had. I want to know if there's anything that I missed, anything you want to add to the discussion, anything I misinterpreted, anything the articles misinterpreted, right? But at the end of the day, this whole question of sexual assault has become one of the most useful political tools, especially in the Me Too era, for dismantling, depositioning, and undermining men I've ever seen, right? But it's often being done so with a level of dishonesty and disingenuousness that is unparalleled. And now that men are pushing back and withdrawing at the same time is interesting. Pushing back against certain narratives, withdrawing from certain types of social participation. This is not going to go well. You got L. Jackson. Appreciate that. Says, Doc, I love the knowledge and insight you drop in your show. There's a lot of talk about men becoming emotionally intelligent. Do you think that we are taught to be emotionally disciplined, vice women and girls being reckless? I wouldn't say we're being taught emotional discipline. I think men are starting to return to an idea of emotional discipline, right? Because if anything, what we're taught is men are just violent, emotionally so and physically, right? But I think there are men who are pushing for emotional discipline as well as physical discipline. They're recognizing the relationships between the two, consistency, right? Health, so on and so forth. All these things tie together. And I think you're seeing a push to it, but it's not happening in terms of how women in particular and society as a whole wants to see it, right? They only support men's emotional intelligence when it's useful for them. What happens when it isn't, right? When you talk about, emotional intelligence and manhood, the capacity to set boundaries and say no is unparalleled in terms of establishing that manhood. Society does not want men to do that. They want them to acquiesce. Men are pushing it back against it. Black Dragon says, great work as always, Doc. Appreciate that. Thank you for that. Yeah. So anyway, y'all have a good one. Again, I want to hear your comments. Let me know what you think. And at the end of the day, y'all have a good one. Peace.